two siblings were sitting quietly in first class, looking forward to their flight, when all of a sudden, an angry flight attendant walked up to them and told them they had to get up. They did, feeling embarrassed in front of everyone, but the flight attendant didn't know that their father owned the whole airline, and she would soon regret ever judging them. Before we start the story, let us know where you're watching from and don't forget to subscribe. As they took their seats in the comfortable, roomy first-class cabin of the plane, Mia, a thoughtful 16-year-old, carefully put her small backpack under the seat in front of her and helped her younger brother Elijah, who had just turned 14, properly buckle his seatbelt. They were proud and excited because their father had given them these special first-class tickets for doing so well in school. The seats were big and soft, which was very different from their previous trips in economy class. Elijah eagerly looked around the cabin. He looked out the window at other planes slowly taxiing across the runway, and his eyes were sparkling with excitement. Mia smiled softly, feeling a mix of pride and responsibility because this was their first flight without their parents. She sat down, picked up a magazine, and started quietly flipping through its pages while people continued to board the plane. A senior flight attendant named Karen walked down the aisle, checking tickets and greeting people politely. She had worked for the airline for many years, and people respected her. Karen wore a sharp uniform and walked like she was in charge of everything around her. When she saw Mia and Elijah, her happy face quickly turned into a confused frown. She looked around the cabin briefly, as if she thought someone else was sitting there, and then she approached the siblings with a suspicious air. Karen stood next to Mia's seat, cleared her throat loudly, and spoke in a voice loud enough for other people to hear. "Excuse me, are you?" Karen asked sharply, "Are you sure you're sitting in the right seats?" Mia looked up quickly, surprised by the question, and politely handed over both boarding passes. "Yes, ma'am, seats 1A and 1B, Mia replied softly. Karen looked at the tickets, her eyes narrowing a little. She paused and handed the tickets back roughly. "These seats are for first-class passengers. Are your parents flying with you?" Karen asked, her tone suggesting disbelief. "No, they're not," Mia answered, shaking her head gently to stay calm. Karen stood up straighter, put her hands on her hips, and looked down at them with doubt. "I'm afraid there might be some confusion. First-class seats are very expensive and reserved for specific passengers," she said out loud so that everyone could hear. Mia felt her cheeks warm with embarrassment as she realized that everyone was now staring at them. Elijah shifted uncomfortably in his seat, confused and nervous about what was going on. Mia gently touched his hand. Christine quickly turned and walked toward the front of the plane, her steps short and sure. She left Mia and Elijah sitting anxiously, feeling exposed in front of other passengers. Mia looked down at her hands and breathed slowly to calm herself, not realizing how much worse things were about to get. Christine quickly returned, her face now stern and cold, and she stalked again next to Mia and Elijah, this time speaking louder and with more authority. "Listen. There must have been a mistake. These seats belong to our first-class passengers, and you two need to move right away to the economy cabin," she said firmly, which drew even more attention from nearby passengers. Mia's heart sank, and Elijah nervously looked around, his excitement turning to embarrassment. Mia gathered her courage and politely showed the tickets again. "But ma'am, we have first-class tickets. Our father booked these seats for us," she said, her voice shaking a little with confusion. Karen barely glanced at the tickets. As she snapped, impatiently, "Tickets can get mixed up, especially with minors flying alone. Maybe your father misunderstood something. Economy is in the back, and you're delaying the boarding process." Passengers started whispering to each other, some turning away uncomfortably, while others watched with interest, wanting to see how things would go. Mia felt a hot wave of shame wash over her, but she tried hard to stay calm because she didn't want to make a scene or upset Elijah. Mia slowly stood up and motioned for Elijah to follow her. The siblings picked up their backpacks while aware that many eyes were watching them. Karen stood off to the side, not offering any help, her face showing that she was happy that the problem had been solved. Mia and Elijah walked down the narrow aisle toward the back, their faces red with shame. Mia fought back tears, determined not to let anyone see her cry, as they finally found 2 empty seats near the back of the economy cabin. Elijah asked worriedly, "Why did she make us leave? Did we do something wrong?" Mia shook her head and gently comforted her brother. Her heart was heavy. She couldn't understand why they had been treated this way when they hadn't done anything wrong. As they settled into their new seats, Mia took out her phone and typed a message to their dad. "Dad, something bad happened and they made us leave first class." The flight attendant didn't believe our tickets were real. "We're now in economy," she wrote in the message, not knowing what would happen next or that their father would soon make sure that this incident would change everything, not just for Karen but for the airline as well. Karen went back to her duties in first class, walking gracefully down the aisle, greeting other passengers, and carefully avoiding any mention of what had just happened. She pretended that taking the siblings out of their seats was normal and a small problem that she had quickly fixed. Some nearby passengers looked at their phones or magazines uncomfortably, not sure if they should say anything or not. Karen was sure she had handled the situation correctly. She had worked for this airline for many years and never had anyone question her decision about who belonged where. Back in economy, Mia sat next to Elijah and watched funny videos on her phone to comfort him. She wanted to take his mind off of what had happened, but she was deeply hurt on the inside. Feeling confused, her phone rang, and she quickly checked the new message. It was from their father and simply said, "Tell me exactly what happened, who made you move seats." Mia swallowed hard as she read his words, sensing how serious they were. She typed quickly, explaining briefly how the flight attendant had refused to believe their tickets were real, embarrassed them in public, and made them move seats. Her father's response was immediate and direct, "Stay calm, I'll take care of this right away." I put down my phone, relieved, but not sure what her father meant. She had a lot of faith in him and knew he would never react without a reason. Elijah looked at her with interest, sensing that something important was happening. "Is Dad upset?" he asked softly. Mia nodded gently and reassured him with a small smile. "Dad's going to sort it out. Don't worry, just relax and enjoy the flight," she said quietly. Elijah seemed comforted by her calmness, leaning back in his seat trying to shake off the embarrassment he still felt at the front of the plane. Karen poured herself a cup of coffee. Proud that she had kept the cabin clean and organized, a younger flight attendant named Anna approached Karen carefully. "Are you sure those kids didn't belong in first class?" Anna asked in a soft voice so as not to sound rude. Karen rolled her eyes and sipped her coffee. "Come on, Anna, you've seen enough to know when something doesn't look right. They clearly didn't belong there." Karen answered confidently, not realizing that what she said would come back to haunt her. Suddenly, the plane's internal phone rang sharply from the cockpit. Karen quickly put down her coffee and answered, "This is Karen." The captain's voice was calm but unusually firm, telling Karen, "We've just received an urgent call from the airline management about a serious issue. We need you in the cockpit immediately." Karen felt her heart skip a beat and became uneasy. Without saying a word, she quickly straightened her back. Karen put on her uniform and walked quickly to the cockpit, not realizing that the world she had carefully controlled was about to fall apart. When she got there, she felt a tightness in her chest that she couldn't explain. The captain looked at her calmly, his face serious and unreadable. Next to him, the first officer avoided eye contact, focusing on adjusting controls. Karen's eyes then moved to a small screen near the captain that showed a video call directly to the airline's main office. An airline executive stood nearby and stared at her with a cold intensity. Karen cleared her throat nervously as she waited for the captain to explain what was going on. "Karen," the captain began slowly, "we got a direct call from Mr. Reynolds himself, the airline's CEO. He's very upset about something that just happened on this flight." When Karen heard the CEO's name, she felt a sudden rush of fear. The airline executive on the screen spoke up right away, his voice firm and sharp. "Miss Karen, why did you remove 2 young passengers from their first-class seats without properly verifying their tickets?" he asked her, his eyes fixed on her. Karen hesitated for a moment, her face red with shame. "Sir, there was a misunderstanding. Their tickets looked suspicious. I was following protocol," she quickly explained, hoping that her firm voice would hide her nerves. The executive's face turned colder. "There was a misunderstanding. Those 2 passengers you removed are Mia and Elijah Reynolds, the children of Mr. Reynolds, the owner of this airline. They were traveling with valid first-class tickets issued personally by their father." He spoke slowly, and each word hit Karen harder than the last. Her stomach dropped, and her mouth went dry. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. The room felt very small, and Karen felt exposed. Realizing how big her mistake was, the captain looked at her silently, his eyes sending a clear message that she'd made a mistake that couldn't be fixed. Karen struggled to find words, her voice shaking slightly. "Sir, I didn't realize, they didn't seem like typical first-class passengers." "It wasn't intentional," she said, stumbling over her words as she tried to defend herself. In some way, the executive shook his head slowly, clearly not impressed by her answer. "Miss Karen, we judge passengers by their tickets, not by how they look. Mr. Reynolds expects immediate action. You must publicly apologize to his children and escort them back to first class immediately. Further disciplinary action will be discussed once you land," he said firmly, leaving no room for debate. Karen felt dizzy with shame. Her whole career, which she had always been proud of, flashed before her eyes. She used to be in charge of her flights and everyone respected her, but now her reputation was falling apart in front of everyone. She couldn't argue, so she stiffly nodded and said, "Yes, sir, I understand." Her voice was barely above a whisper. As Karen slowly left the cockpit, each step felt heavier than the last. Her confidence was shattered, and she knew that everyone on board would soon know the truth for the first time. She felt completely helpless, knowing that she was about to face the consequences of her own assumptions and mistakes. Back of the plane, her heart was pounding loudly, and her cheeks were flushed with shame. Passengers looked at her with interest, as if they sensed something strange had happened. When Karen got to the economy section, she saw Mia and Elijah sitting quietly, their phones in hand. Karen stopped, took a deep breath to calm herself, and then stepped forward. She gently cleared her throat, which made Mia and Elijah look up in surprise. "Miss Reynolds, Master Reynolds," Karen began quietly, her voice trembling a little. "I made a serious mistake. There was no problem with your tickets. I'm sorry for my behavior. Please allow me to escort you both back to your original seats in first class," Mia said, noticing how uncomfortable and embarrassed the flight attendant looked. Elijah looked up at his sister, not sure what to say, but waiting for her response. Mia didn't answer right away. She held Karen's face calmly for a moment before finally speaking. "You were sure we didn't belong there. Could you please explain why?" Several people around them had stopped pretending to be busy and were now openly listening to the conversation. "I made a judgment based on appearance," Karen said in a soft voice, filled with shame. Mia nodded slowly and quietly, acknowledging the honesty in Karen's answer but not relieving her embarrassment. Without saying anything else, Mia stood up and quietly helped Elijah gather their things. They moved quietly into the aisle and waited for Karen to lead them back to first class. Karen thought the aisle went on forever. She could feel everyone's eyes on her passengers, silently judging what they were seeing. When they got to first class, a few people looked up in shock and surprise, and the whispers started up again. This time, Mia and Elijah sat down in their original seats, calmly and with their quiet dignity on full display. Karen, who was standing awkwardly next to them, tried to calm down. "If there's anything else you need during the flight, please let me know," she said, her voice weak. Looked at her again, this time with a soft but firm expression. "Thank you," she replied softly, turning her attention to comforting Elijah to make it clear that they were done talking. Karen quickly turned away, feeling small and embarrassed and desperately wanting to disappear from everyone's view. As she walked back to the galley, her mind raced because she knew this moment was far from over. She had no idea how bad the consequences of her actions would be, but she had a strong feeling that everything about her career and possibly even Mia's life was about to change dramatically back in first class. Mia put her arm around Elijah and spoke calmly and quietly to him. "Everything will be okay now that Dad knows, and he will handle it. Let's just relax and enjoy the rest of the flight." Elijah slowly nodded, trying to get back to the excitement he had felt earlier. Mia looked out the window, but her thoughts were elsewhere, even though she seemed to be thinking about her boyfriend. Although she seemed calm on the outside, she was still deeply upset and hurt by the unfair treatment and shame they had experienced in the galley. Karen stood nervously pouring herself another cup of coffee. Her hands were shaking a little, making the simple task harder. Anna watched in silence from a short distance, clearly noticing how upset and unsettled Karen was. She hesitantly stepped closer, her voice soft and careful. "Karen, are you okay?" she asked quietly. Karen looked up sharply, her eyes filled with frustration and embarrassment. "Do I look okay to you, Anna?" "I just embarrassed myself in public because I didn't take the time to think," Karen snapped, quickly regretting her harsh tone as she saw Anna's shocked reaction. Anna, sensing Karen's anger, took a deep breath and replied, "I'm sorry I made you feel worse. Maybe now you'll see how easy it is to hurt someone with a wrong assumption." Karen froze for a moment, Anna's gentle words piercing deeply, forcing her to consider something uncomfortable. Maybe this wasn't the first time she'd made such judgments without realizing the harm she'd caused. She didn't respond, turning away, instead feeling even worse now. The confidence she had carried for years felt shattered, replaced by uncertainty and shame. Karen's thoughts were suddenly interrupted as the intercom system buzzed and the captain's voice calmly spoke, "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be landing soon. Please make sure you're okay. Make sure your seatbelts are fastened and your tray tables are put away." Karen quickly straightened her uniform again, trying to get back to a professional attitude, but her heart was heavy with worry about what would happen when they landed. She knew that this would likely have serious consequences. She had spent years building a respected career, and now it all seemed to hang by a thread, depending on the whims of the airline CEO, whose children she had embarrassed. As the plane began to descend, Mia received another text message from. The message from her father was clear and reassuring. "I'll be waiting when you land. Everything will be fine. I'm proud of how you've handled this." Reading his words made Mia feel a wave of relief, and his calm and steady presence comforted her even from a distance. She looked at Elijah, who was looking out the window and seemed calmer. His earlier embarrassment was slowly fading as he focused on the excitement of landing. Mia gently squeezed his hand, reassuring him once more that they were safe and sound. Karen. As she prepared the cabin for landing, her body was stiff and mechanical, and her mind was somewhere else. She avoided looking into the passengers' eyes, feeling the judgment and curiosity in their eyes. She felt trapped. Her once safe world was now uncertain. She had no idea what would happen next, but she knew her future felt very fragile. As the wheels touched the runway, she silently hoped that she could fix this, even though she knew it was too late. As the plane rolled gently towards the gate, a tense silence fell. Inside the cabin, people quietly gathered their things while sneaking glances at Mia and Elijah, who were sitting quietly and waiting calmly. Karen, on the other hand, stood stiffly near the exit door, getting ready for people to get off. Her heart was racing because she knew what she probably faced when the doors opened for the first time in years. She didn't know what to expect and couldn't control her anxiety. Every whispered conversation around her felt like an accusation, and every glance felt like a harsh judgment of her mistake. When the plane finally took off, the seatbelt sign went off, and people quickly got up to leave. But before anyone could move into the aisle, the captain's voice came back over the speakers. His tone was unusually firm. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated for just a moment. We have a brief matter to attend to before you exit." People on the plane looked at each other puzzled, sensing that something strange was going on. Suddenly, the plane door opened from the outside, and two airline security officers stepped on board. Karen felt her throat tighten as one of the officers spoke directly to her. "Miss Karen, please come with us. Airline management needs to talk to you right away about your behavior on this flight." The officer's voice was calm but firm, and passengers nearby could hear it, causing gasps and whispers. Karen hesitated for a moment, her face flushed with shame and shock, before nodding silently, knowing she had no choice but to follow Karen as she stepped forward. As she was being led by the two security guards, she couldn't help but glance briefly at Mia and Elijah's seats. Mia watched her quietly, not angry or sympathetic, just observing with calm dignity. Elijah looked down, avoiding her gaze, still feeling the sting of the humiliation she'd caused. Karen's shame grew as she moved through the cabin, aware that every passenger was closely watching her fall. Once Karen got off the plane, the atmosphere in the cabin changed. Heavy, the captain's voice filled the quiet space again, this time softer and reassuring. "Thank you for your patience. You may now safely exit the aircraft." Passengers started slowly and quietly gathering their things, some looking sympathetically at the siblings and others whispering about the shocking event they had just seen. Mia and Elijah waited until the aisle was almost empty before standing and gathering their things. Mia moved carefully, keeping her cool despite how intense what she was seeing was. Elijah was holding her hand tightly, and his excitement for the flight had turned into worry and confusion. When they got off the plane, they saw their father waiting for them at the gate. He was there to greet them, and his presence was both commanding and comforting. His calm, powerful gaze quickly found them softening when he saw the worry in their faces, and he quickly approached, gently pulling both Mia and Elijah into a protective embrace and asking, "Are you both okay?" He asked softly, his voice full of genuine worry. Mia slowly nodded. As her father held them close, she felt a huge sense of relief. "We're fine now, Dad. It was just really hard," she whispered. Her father nodded and held them firmly. "I'm so proud of how brave you both were today. Nobody deserves to be treated like that," he said softly, but his tone suggested he wasn't done with the situation yet. Their father turned slightly and looked directly at a group of airline executives and security staff nearby. They stood quietly. "I need this to be dealt with right away," he said calmly but firmly, leaving no room for confusion. "This isn't just about my children, it's about how we treat all passengers. I expect full accountability." The airline executives nodded respectfully, promising to take immediate action. Holding Mia and Elijah close, their father led them gently through the busy terminal, each step filled with purpose and clarity. Even though the situation had been painful and unfair, Mia could feel something important was happening. Even at that moment, she knew that their hard time would be a powerful force for real change. For now, she was just thankful that the worst seemed to be over. Karen, on the other hand, didn't know that the real consequences were just beginning. As she walked through the busy airport terminal, flanked by 2 airline security officers, each step felt heavier than the last. The bright lights and busy sounds of the airport suddenly overwhelmed the people nearby. Stopping to look, Karen kept her eyes on the ground, desperately avoiding their stares. Every whisper she overheard felt sharper, and every look felt more critical. For years, she had walked these same hallways with competence and authority, proud of the respect her position earned her, but now all she felt was shame and regret. The officers led Karen to a private area reserved for airline management. They went down a quiet hallway lined with offices until they reached A. The door to the room that said Executive Meeting Room opened to reveal 3 serious-looking senior airline executives inside. Karen walked in slowly, her heart beating fast, and was told to sit at the end of a long conference table. The executives watched Karen settle into her chair, their eyes filled with disappointment and worry. After a tense moment of silence, one executive, a tall, sharply dressed woman named Rebecca Morris, who was known for being fair but also. Rebecca spoke first, her voice calm but firm. "Karen, you must understand how serious this situation is. You publicly humiliated T1 passengers because of assumptions you made about them based on how they looked. This not only embarrassed those passengers but also hurt our airline's reputation and values. Do you realize how deeply troubling that is?" Karen looked Rebecca straight in the eyes and replied, "I understand, Ms. Morris. I didn't mean to hurt anyone. I was trying to follow the rules, but now I see what a terrible mistake I made," she replied, her voice shaky but sincere. Rebecca shook her head slowly, her expression staying the same. "Our rules are clear. If there's ever confusion about passenger seating, the correct procedure is to calmly and privately verify tickets with ground staff. You chose instead to act publicly and harshly, undermining passengers' dignity." Another executive, Mr. Jonathan Reed, leaned forward, his face just as serious as Rebecca's. "This incident has forced us to confront. We've already gotten a lot of messages from passengers worried about how this incident affects the airline as a whole." He carefully explained the gravity of the situation. Karen's stomach tightened even more, and she tried hard to hold back tears. She knew her mistake was big, but hearing how it affected the whole airline was shocking. "I'm truly sorry for what I did. I know it won't change what happened, but I'm sorry," Karen said quietly, her voice breaking a little. Rebecca sighed deeply, clearly disappointed but understanding of Karen's sincerity in her apology. After a moment of silence, Rebecca finally spoke again, this time with a softer but still firm voice. "Because of how bad this incident was, you are immediately suspended from all duties until a formal review and hearing before the disciplinary committee during. You will not be paid during this suspension, and you are not allowed to enter any airline property or facilities. The next steps will be decided by a committee after carefully reviewing today's events," Rebecca made it clear, leaving no doubt about Karen's immediate future. Karen felt her whole world shift sharply beneath her. She knew there would be consequences, but she wasn't ready for the harsh reality of immediate suspension. She swallowed hard and forced herself to stay calm, saying, "I understand and accept her decision." Karen replied in a low voice, almost a whisper. Mr. Reed nodded sympathetically, but it was clear that he agreed with Rebecca's choice. "We encourage you to deeply reflect on your behavior and to fully cooperate with the upcoming review. This is a chance for you to learn and grow from this experience," he said with a touch of kindness. Karen nodded slowly, knowing exactly what was expected. The executive stood to signal that the meeting was over, and Karen stood up unsteadily, her legs weak beneath her. As airline security walked her back into the room, she felt deeply lost and unsure of what to do next. The hallway seemed longer and colder, and all she could think about was how sure she had felt that morning and how quickly one bad choice could change everything. Outside the terminal, Karen stood alone, and the cool breeze of late afternoon hit her face, painfully reminding her of her new reality. The airport had always felt like home to her, but now it was not. She felt completely disconnected from it and knew that her life and career would never be the same again. Her mistake wasn't just about losing her job or reputation, it was about facing something deeper within herself that she had been avoiding for too long. For the first time, Karen realized she had a lot to think about, and even though it hurt, she could no longer avoid it. Mia and Elijah sat quietly with their father in a private lounge area inside the airport. The space was quiet and away from the noise of the. There were lots of people outside, comfortable seats, and soothing music, but Mia still felt uneasy inside. She looked over at Elijah, who was now eating some snacks their father had brought him in peace, clearly feeling better because of their father's calm presence. Their father gently put a comforting hand on Mia's shoulder, sensing her worry, and asked, "Are you feeling better?" Softly asked his daughter, looking deeply into her eyes to see if there was any more pain or worry. Mia paused, then told him the truth. "I'm okay now, Dad, but it still hurts. I don't understand why that flight attendant treated us like we did something wrong. Why didn't she just believe us?" her father asked slowly, realizing how deeply his daughter felt. He spoke carefully, choosing his words to explain a hard truth. Sometimes people judge quickly without knowing the facts. It's unfair, it's wrong, and unfortunately it happens more often than we realize today. She made assumptions about you and. He told Elijah calmly, watching Mia closely to see if she understood. Mia listened carefully, taking in every word. Elijah looked up from his snacks and carefully followed the conversation. "But why would she do that, Dad?" Elijah asked softly, still confused. Their father sighed deeply and leaned forward to explain something hard to both of them because people have biases they don't even know they have. Maybe she had certain expectations about him. He carefully explained, hoping that his words would help them understand without making them feel even more hurt. "She thought you belonged in first class, and when you didn't, she reacted badly. It wasn't about you, it was about something wrong inside her that she needs to recognize and change." Mia thought about her father's words, starting to understand something important. "Does anyone else have this happen to them?" she asked carefully, her eyes full of real interest and worry. Her father nodded solemnly and met her gaze directly. "Yes, Mia. Sadly, it does happen a lot, which is why it's so important we speak out against it. By talking about what happened today, we're not only standing up for ourselves, but also for everyone else who faces similar injustice and doesn't have someone to speak for them," he said, making the point very clear. Their father paused, thinking carefully about what to say next. He looked directly at both of his children and said, "I want you to know something very important. I'm proud of how brave and calm you both are today. You both handled a difficult situation with honor and courage, and that matters a great deal. Because of what you went through, we have the chance to make changes at our airline that will make sure this doesn't happen again. Sometimes bad things happen to us to help us understand things better and make us stronger and better people." Mia took a deep breath, feeling reassured by her father's words. She realized that what they had been through wasn't just unfair, it was part of a bigger problem. "Dad, will the flight attendant be okay?" Mia asked softly, surprising herself by caring about Karen's future despite the hurtful experience. Her father looked at her warmly, understanding her compassion and maturity. "Karen will face consequences because what she did was a crime," he told her. "She could learn and become a better person, just like the airline could. People can change, Mia, if they're willing to face their mistakes honestly," he said gently, making sure she understood that fairness and compassion could coexist with accountability. Mia nodded slowly, taking in his words and feeling stronger and calmer with each moment. Elijah smiled softly, clearly comforting and reassuring their father as he softly squeezed Mia's shoulder. "Let's get you both home," he said warmly, slowly standing up and encouraging them to do the same. Mia and Elijah quietly gathered their things and walked closely beside their father as they left the quiet lounge area and moved back through the busy airport terminal. As they walked, Mia noticed airline staff watching them from a distance, clearly aware of who they were and what had happened. She saw kindness and sympathy in their eyes, which was a stark contrast to the rest of the day. Compared to the shame and criticism she had felt on the plane earlier, it made her realize that not everyone was like Karen and that many people deeply understood fairness and compassion. Mia held her head higher, feeling stronger and proud that their hard experience could now lead to something good. Their father led them gently through the crowd toward the exit, reassuring them of their safety and dignity at every step. Mia looked back one last time at the busy airport behind her, knowing that today's events had led to something good. Mia felt a quiet sense of pride knowing that what she and Elijah had been through might really lead to meaningful change, even if it had started from a place of hurt and unfairness. Later that night, Karen sat alone in her small apartment, the silence almost overwhelming her. The events of the day kept playing over and over in her mind. She stared blankly at the uniform lying on her couch. The clean fabric was a stark reminder of everything she had lost: her job, her reputation, and her sense of self-assurance. All of it seemed uncertain now that it was replaced by confusion and deep regret. She had always been proud of her job and confident in her ability to handle passengers and situations well, but today she had lost all confidence, leaving her feeling small and helpless and unable to ignore her racing thoughts. She reluctantly opened her laptop to find dozens of emails and messages waiting for her, some from coworkers and others from airline management. As she opened the latest message, an official letter from the airline's disciplinary committee outlining the seriousness of the incident and confirming her suspension, anxiety spread through her chest. She read each line carefully, the reality sinking deeper into her heart. The letter ended with a clear, uncompromising statement that your future with the airline will depend heavily upon your. Karen let out a heavy sigh and put down her laptop. She was completely lost and didn't know what to do next. Memories of her time as a flight attendant flooded her mind. She remembered many times when she was kind and patient, but she also remembered times when she had quickly judged passengers without fully considering her actions. Had she always been blind to these biases? Were there other times when she'd hurt or annoyed passengers without meaning to? She deeply felt uncomfortable when asked these questions because they made her look inward and face hard truths she had avoided for too long. When Karen was alone, she started to honestly think about the assumptions she'd made about Mia and Elijah. She thought about how sure she'd been at the time and how quickly she'd thought the siblings didn't belong in first class just because of their age and appearance. A wave of shame hit her as she realized the deeper consequences of her actions for others. The first time she really understood how humiliating and painful her actions must have been for Mia and Elijah. This realization hurt a lot, but she knew it was necessary. She knew she had to face this fully if she was ever going to grow from this experience. Feeling restless, Karen stood and paced slowly around her apartment, unable to find peace. Eventually, she stalked near a small shelf full of family photos and looked at an old picture of herself as a girl, smiling big. Karen looked at that picture for a long time and was struck by how much she had changed since then. Somewhere along the way, she had lost the open-mindedness and kindness she used to value so highly. Instead, her sense of pride and authority had replaced empathy and understanding, and now she was paying a heavy price for that mistake. As she sat back down, Karen felt a sudden urge to fully and openly apologize for what she'd done. She knew that saying sorry couldn't fix the damage she'd done to Mia. Karen felt it was important to truly admit her mistakes, so she opened her laptop and carefully chose each word as she wrote a new email to airline management and the Reynolds family. Dear Mr. Reynolds, Mia, and Elijah, I want to express my deepest and most sincere apology for my actions today. I made assumptions about you based on appearance rather than facts, causing you unnecessary pain and humiliation. My behavior was unacceptable, and I am truly sorry for what I did. I'm truly sorry for the harm I caused you both today. Made me face my biases and mistakes in a way I have never done before. I can't change what happened, but I can promise that I will learn from it and never act in this way again. I accept any consequences and will fully cooperate with the airline's disciplinary committee. I hope you can forgive me one day, but I understand if that's not possible. In any case, I want you to know how sorry I am. Seriously, Karen. She read the email several times before finally pressing send. As the message disappeared into cyberspace, she felt a mix of relief and uncertainty. She knew that sending an apology wouldn't magically fix the problem, but it was an important first step toward accountability and change. Karen leaned back in her chair and closed her eyes for a moment. She felt emotionally exhausted but also strangely lighter, as if she'd finally started facing the hard journey ahead, even though she was afraid of losing her job and reputation. Karen felt a tiny spark of hope. Now Karen knew that this painful experience wasn't just a punishment, but a chance to grow as a person, to become more compassionate and aware, and maybe one day to help others avoid making the same mistakes. She also knew that real change required deep honesty and self-reflection, even when those things were very uncomfortable. For the first time in hours, Karen felt calmer, and her heart wasn't racing with worry. She knew that the days ahead would be very hard, but she also knew that she had the strength to get through them. To face whatever came next. Deep down, Karen knew the painful but powerful truth that sometimes the only way to truly grow was to admit our mistakes, face our biases head-on, and make a sincere commitment to becoming better people. Karen stood quietly and moved to a nearby window, where she looked out thoughtfully at the city lights below. As hard as the future seemed, she could now see a path ahead that wasn't marked by mistakes and shame, but by learning, growth, and real change. She may have realized for the first time that the most. It was a hard truth, but Karen finally accepted it fully tonight. The next morning, Mia woke up early, still thinking about what had happened the day before. The sunlight was streaming into her bedroom window, making warm golden patterns across the room, but she didn't feel the comfort it usually did. The hurt she'd felt was still there, mixing with thoughts of what her father had said. She quietly got out of bed and went downstairs to find her. My dad was drinking coffee at the kitchen table and deep in thought when he looked up and gave her a soft smile that carried a quiet strength. "Good morning, sweetheart," he said softly, motioning for her to join him. Mia sat down next to him, pulling her chair closer because she needed his comfort. Her dad seemed to know exactly how she felt without her having to say anything. They sat there quietly for a moment, with only the soft ticking of a clock making noise. Finally, Mia broke the silence by speaking softly but firmly. She told her father in a soft voice, "Dad, I couldn't sleep much last night because I kept thinking about everything that happened. I'm still confused about why people judge each other so quickly. It's like they don't even see the real person." Her father carefully put down his coffee and turned to her, giving her his full attention. "You're right, Mia. People often judge quickly because they rely on assumptions and stereotypes instead of getting to know someone first," he said. "Assumptions are sometimes based on ignorance, fear, or habits that people picked up without realizing it," he explained calmly, making sure she understood. Mia listened carefully, her thoughtful face showing that she was carefully processing his words. "But it hurts so much, Dad," she said, her voice soft but firm. "It hurt Elijah and it hurt me. I thought flying first class would be fun and special, but now it just feels sad." Her voice trailed off softly, and the pain in her eyes was clear. He gently reached out and took her hand, holding it firmly but tenderly. "I understand completely, Mia," he said. "But remember that what happened yesterday wasn't your fault. It wasn't because you and Elijah did anything wrong. It happened because someone else had a bias they weren't even fully aware of." He made it clear that Mia shouldn't feel guilty or ashamed. Mia sat quietly, feeling deeply comforted but still troubled by a thought. "Do you think Karen is really sorry? You think she'll change, Dad?" she asked earnestly, looking directly into his eyes. Her father paused thoughtfully, carefully considering his answer. "I believe people can change, Mia, but they have to genuinely want to." Karen sent us a message last night, a sincere apology. She admitted she was wrong and she seemed honestly regretful, but real change isn't just words, it takes action, time and commitment. Only Karen herself can decide if she'll truly learn from this and become a better person, he said with firm but compassionate tone. He believed in fairness and real accountability. Mia carefully thought about his words, sensing a deeper wisdom in them. After a moment, she spoke again, this time in a soft but strong voice. "I think maybe she can learn, Dad. If we think people can't ever change, then things will always stay the same. It just feels better to believe in hope, even when someone hurts you." Her father smiled warmly, clearly moved by her thoughtful insight. "You're right, Mia. Believing in hope and giving people a chance is brave and important. It's the only way we can make real change," he said, clearly proud of her intelligence and maturity. Just then, Elijah quietly walked in through the kitchen door, rubbing his eyes and mumbling something. He didn't know that Mia and their father were having a deeper conversation, so he didn't know what was going on. Mia quickly walked over to Elijah and comforted him, and he sat down in a chair, still looking a little uncertain. Father smiled reassuringly at Elijah and asked, "How are you feeling today, Elijah? Did you sleep all right?" His voice was soft and calming, and Elijah shrugged slightly, looking nervously at Mia. "I had some weird dreams about yesterday," he admitted quietly. Their father nodded sympathetically, understanding that the incident was still affecting Elijah. "That's understandable," he said. "Sometimes bad things happen even after they're over, but you're safe now, and I'm here for you. We'll get through it. We're in this together," he reassured Elijah in a way that made him feel safe and supported. Elijah was clearly calmed down by his father's words, and Mia noticed that her father was carefully reading through emails and messages on his phone. His face was serious but thoughtful, and she asked, "What happens next, Dad?" She knew something important was going on, so her father looked up at her and said, "Today I'm meeting with airline executives to talk about how to." He emphasized how seriously the airline was taking the situation, saying that there would be new rules and training for all staff about fairness, respect, and recognizing unconscious bias. Mia listened carefully, feeling better knowing that real steps were being taken. Her father continued softly, wanting her to understand the bigger meaning of what happened to them. "What happened to you and Elijah shouldn't happen to anyone, not just because you're my children, but because everyone. Today we'll start making sure our airline lives up to that standard," he said firmly, his voice full of determination and real commitment. Mia felt proud hearing her father's words, even though they reminded her of the painful experience they'd been through. She could see now that it had led to something good and meaningful. "I'm glad something good can come from this, Dad," she said softly, smiling slightly for the first time since yesterday. Her father smiled back and nodded. He gently replied, "That's exactly right, Mia. Sometimes the most meaningful changes start with something hard, even painful. It's never easy, but it's important, and it matters deeply." He was clearly proud of her thoughtful answer and felt comforted and reassured. Mia stood quietly next to her father, sharing a moment of understanding and hope. Elijah joined them, sensing the importance of the moment, and the three of them stood together, ready to face whatever came next with courage and dignity. Mia felt deeply. She was thankful that she was never alone, no matter how hard things got. She knew that real strength wasn't about never getting hurt, but about learning, growing, and standing firm in the face of injustice, determined to make things better for everyone. Later that same morning, Karen stood still in front of the airline's headquarters and looked nervously at the tall building she had been inside countless times before. Today, she felt different. She had doubts, fears, and deep regrets. She knew this wasn't a normal day. Instead of a normal meeting to talk about schedules or crew assignments, Karen knew she was going to a serious disciplinary hearing that could affect the rest of her career and her life. She took a deep breath to calm herself before carefully walking into the building, which felt strangely colder and less welcoming than usual. Employees walking through the lobby noticed Karen and quickly looked away, knowing they must have heard about what happened. Karen tried to stay calm as she walked steadily toward the elevators, knowing exactly where she was supposed to be. As the elevator rose to the executive floor, she tried to mentally prepare herself for what was to come by repeating to herself in her head the promise she'd made to take responsibility and face the consequences honestly. When she walked into the large executive meeting room, she saw that the disciplinary committee was already seated and waiting. At the head of the table was Rebecca Morris. Jonathan Reed and two other senior executives, whom Karen recognized, greeted her formally but politely, making it clear how important the meeting was. Karen sat quietly, carefully straightening her posture and meeting their gazes with respect, determined to stay calm despite how nervous she felt. Rebecca opened the meeting right away, her voice clear and direct. "Karen, we're here today to go over the serious incident involving Mia and Elijah Reynolds on Flight 236. This hearing is your chance to fully explain yourself and give your side of the story. We have already looked over reports from passengers, crew members, and your own statement, but we want to hear directly from you. Can you clearly describe your actions and thought process on that flight?" Rebecca asked in a firm but fair way, stressing how important it is to be honest. Karen paused briefly to collect her thoughts before speaking. "That day, I approached Mia and Elijah because I made an incorrect and unfair assumption about. I questioned them publicly and harshly about their seating arrangement based only on appearance and my own preferences instead of calmly and discreetly verifying their tickets as the policy clearly states. I didn't realize how deeply unfair my actions were until after the damage had already been done. I fully accept responsibility for my mistakes and I deeply regret the pain and humiliation I caused them both," Karen said, making direct eye contact and determined to show sincere accountability. Executives listened carefully and clearly understood how serious Karen's actions were. Jonathan Reed then spoke, his voice calm but firm. "Karen, we appreciate your honesty and your clear recognition of the mistake, but we must also address that your actions have had significant consequences for the airline's reputation and passenger trust. This wasn't just an isolated incident, it brought to light serious issues about bias and fairness within our crew. Do you fully understand how serious?" He asked directly about these bigger issues and carefully watched Karen's response. Karen politely nodded, acknowledging the seriousness of his words. "I understand completely, Mr. Reed. My actions have caused deep harm not only to Mia and Elijah but also to our airline's integrity and reputation. I see clearly now how important it is for all crew members, but especially for me to recognize and challenge my biases openly. I want you to know I am committed to learning from this experience and taking active steps toward becoming more aware." Rebecca interrupted Karen's answer with a pause to carefully consider it. After a short silence, she continued, Karen, we have received your apology email to the Reynolds family and your written statement. Both were sincere and reflective, but our decision today must focus on accountability and setting clear standards for everyone at this airline. Your previous record has been strong, but this incident remains extremely serious. It deeply contradicts. Sincerity alone wouldn't fix the serious problem, she said, making it clear that Karen had to listen carefully and take in every word, fully understanding how serious their discussions were. Karen's anxiety level rose, but she stayed focused and determined to stay calm and polite. Rebecca continued, carefully choosing each word on purpose, saying, given your honesty, sincere apology, and previous positive record, we believe there is potential for learning. As a result, Rebecca made it clear that there would be no room for negotiation. Your suspension will last for 3 months without pay. During this time, you will be required to complete mandatory sensitivity and anti-bias training programs as well as community-based service specifically focused on diversity, inclusion, and fairness. Karen felt both relieved and humbled. She had been afraid of being fired, but she knew what the big deal was. Jonathan Reed told Karen firmly, Karen, when your suspension and training are over, your employment status will be reevaluated thoroughly based on your progress and genuine commitment. Understand clearly that this is not a guarantee of reinstatement but rather an opportunity to demonstrate sincere growth and change. He said this in a way that made Karen aware that she had to work hard to rebuild trust. Karen nodded respectfully and replied, I fully accept these conditions and thank you for giving me this chance. I am deeply committed to doing everything necessary to regain trust and prove my sincere commitment to positive change. I won't take this lightly. Rebecca and Jonathan gave Karen short nods of approval, making it clear that they appreciated her acceptance and willingness to change. When the meeting ended, Karen quietly left the room, her heart full of mixed emotions, including relief, humility, and sincere determination. As she stepped outside the building again, the sun warmed her face, reminding her clearly that today was the start of a hard but necessary new chapter in Karen's career. Her future depended on her own dedication, reflection, and action. It was difficult, even painful, but it was also clearly important and meaningful. Standing alone for a moment, Karen knew that this experience had deeply changed her. It made her face biases she'd ignored and pushed her to become a more compassionate and thoughtful person. She didn't know what the future held, but she felt a quiet strength building inside her. After honest reflection and real accountability, Karen realized that real growth always involved discomfort, vulnerability, and sincere effort. Today was just the first step on a long journey, but Karen was finally ready to take it fully, bravely, and honestly. In the weeks after the incident, Mia and Elijah slowly got back to their normal lives. They went back to school, sports practices, and spent time with friends, which helped them regain a sense of routine. Even though she was doing things she had done before, Mia kept thinking deeply about what they had been through. She became more aware of and sensitive to unfair situations around her that she hadn't fully noticed before. She quietly watched how people talked to each other and how quick judgments were made based on appearances or assumptions, which made her think and sometimes feel uneasy. One afternoon, Mia sat quietly in the school cafeteria while her friends chattered happily around her. Usually she would easily laugh and joke around, but today she was so deep in thought that she barely heard what was being said. Sophia, one of Mia's best friends, noticed how quiet she was and asked her, Hey Mia, you've been quiet lately. Is everything okay? Sophia looked worried at Mia, and she paused for a moment, not sure how much to say. Eventually, she decided to be honest. I'd just been thinking a lot lately about how people treat each other, Mia said, taking a soft look around the cafeteria. Sophie slowly nodded. It's strange how quickly people judge without really knowing someone. She asked. You mean like what happened on your flight? Mia quietly nodded, thankful that Sophia understood without needing to be told again. Yeah, exactly. It made me realize how easily people can hurt each other just by assuming things. I never noticed it so clearly before, Mia said, her voice showing real sadness. Sophia put a comforting hand on Mia's shoulder, understanding. Sophia softly agreed, maybe now that people know what happened to you, they'll start noticing more. Mia smiled and felt better because her friend was there for her. As they sat there quietly, a thoughtful voice spoke up next to them. Mia turned around and saw Ethan, a classmate she knew but wasn't very close to, sitting nearby. Ethan spoke carefully but honestly. I overheard you talking. I'm sorry that happened to you and your brother. It's not fair. I've seen stuff happen. Like that happened before, but I didn't really pay attention until now. Ethan's words surprised and deeply moved Mia. She realized that her experience had already reached people outside of her immediate circle, making them think about how they behave. Mia turned to Ethan and said, "Thank you for saying that. It helps to know that people actually care." Ethan nodded respectfully, clearly appreciating Mia's honesty. I think it's important people talk about. It shouldn't be normal to judge or treat someone badly based on how they look or where they sit on an airplane, he said firmly. Mia noticed other classmates nearby, who were now quietly listening and thinking about what they were saying. It made Mia feel powerful to know that just talking about her experience had started a meaningful conversation among her peers. Later that night, at home, Mia told her father about the conversation she'd had with Sophia and Ethan. He listened carefully and was clearly impressed by how mature Mia was, telling her, "I'm proud of you." He put a warm, reassuring hand on Mia's shoulder and said, "You're helping others understand something very important. Change happens one person at a time through honest conversations like the one you had today." Mia smiled softly, feeling deeply reassured by her father's words. Meanwhile, Karen started to rebuild herself by fully committing to the disciplinary committee's conditions. She enrolled immediately in the required sensitivity and anti-bias training programs and started going to classes. Karen's weekly sessions were hard at first because they made her face hard truths about herself that she hadn't thought about before. At first, Karen felt defensive and uncomfortable listening to stories about discrimination, bias, and unfair treatment, but over time she opened up and learned how to listen carefully to the experiences of others without judging or being defensive. One evening at a community-based workshop she attended, Karen sat in a circle with other people and quietly listened as they shared their stories. Hearing first-hand accounts of prejudice that hurt people in ways similar to her own deeply affected her. She realized how her own assumptions had hurt people in ways she hadn't fully realized before it was Karen's turn to speak. She hesitated for a moment, feeling vulnerable but determined, and then she began telling the group her story honestly. "I made a terrible mistake a few several weeks ago," she said quietly, her voice trembling a little. "I wrongly assumed that two young passengers didn't belong in first class just because of how they looked. I embarrassed and hurt them in public because of my own biases. At first, I had a hard time fully understanding how deeply harmful my actions were, but these sessions have completely opened my eyes. I now see how much pain my assumptions caused, and I'm committed to never making that mistake again." According to Karen, the group listened quietly and understood her sincerity. After a thoughtful silence, an older woman named Grace spoke softly and understandingly, telling Karen, "It takes courage to admit mistakes honestly and publicly. Change is never easy, but it's always possible. What matters now is what you do going forward, how you grow and how you help others grow. You're not alone on this journey." Karen felt deeply comforted and encouraged. Karen knew that her journey of self-awareness and change would be hard, but Grace's kindness gave her strength and hope. That's when she realized for the first time that true accountability wasn't just punishment or remorse. It meant actively working toward becoming a better person who was deeply aware and genuinely compassionate. Over the next few weeks, Karen got involved in a lot of community projects and volunteered at programs that promoted diversity, inclusion, and equality. Karen worked carefully and thoughtfully, actively applying what she had learned from her mistakes and her training. Over time, people in these communities started to accept and respect Karen, seeing clearly that she was truly committed to making things better. Even though Karen was still unsure about her future at the airline, she now felt like she had a meaningful purpose and was determined that no matter what happened, she would keep doing this important work. In the meantime, Mia kept talking openly and honestly with her friends and classmates about fairness, dignity, and to question her assumptions. Each conversation had made her realize how powerful one experience could be. Even though Mia and Karen's paths were different, they were unknowingly connected through this difficult but transformative experience. Each of them grew deeply and genuinely in their own way. They both learned that real growth and meaningful change could come from pain and difficulty as long as they were willing to face those moments honestly and openly several times. After a few months, the airline made big changes to make sure that things like Mia and Elijah's never happened again. All employees, from pilots and flight attendants to ground staff and managers, had to go through mandatory training on diversity, unconscious bias, and respectful communication. The airline's top executives also talked about these problems in public, making it clear that accountability and genuine respect were values that could not be compromised. Passengers noticed and appreciated these efforts, and slowly but surely, the airline's reputation began to improve. Trust in the airline's honesty started to grow again. Karen finished all of her required programs with dedication and humility, getting good feedback from teachers and community leaders. During her suspension, she volunteered regularly, sincerely trying to help others avoid making the same mistakes she had. Through her volunteer work, Karen felt herself changing, becoming more thoughtful, compassionate, and deeply aware of how important it is to be kind and fair. She often thought about Mia and Elijah. Finally, the day came when Karen had to go back to the airline's headquarters to meet with the disciplinary committee then. As she walked into the same executive meeting room, she felt both nervous and hopeful. Rebecca Morris and Jonathan Reed greeted her warmly but professionally, clearly noticing how much she had grown and how humble she was now. They did this by carefully reviewing her progress reports and listening to her thoughts on her journey. The committee agreed that Karen had shown sincere growth and genuine remorse. They offered her reinstatement with clear probationary conditions that stressed continued self-awareness and commitment to the values she had learned. Karen gladly accepted their decision, promising honestly and clearly that she would continue learning, growing, and fighting for real respect and fairness. When she went back to work, she felt deeply humbled and deeply grateful for the chance she'd been given. Her co-workers were cautious at first but gradually became more open-minded. Over time, Karen quietly earned back the respect of her co-workers and passengers by showing compassion and genuine care. She did this by showing through actions, not words, the meaningful changes she had made almost a year after the difficult event. Mia and Elijah were getting ready to travel again, this time with their father on a special family vacation. When they got to the airport, they approached the airline counter and were greeted warmly, clearly aware of what had happened. Mia noticed right away how genuine and respectful each employee's interactions felt, which was very different from what they'd experienced before. As they boarded the plane, the flight attendants smiled and treated every passenger equally, showing that the airline was committed to its new values. As they settled into their seats, Mia and Elijah shared a quiet look, both knowing how important this moment was. Their father watched them with pride, proud of their strength. Mia felt her heart tighten a little as she saw a familiar figure quietly walk down the aisle. It was Karen, now carefully back at work and clearly changed. Karen paused respectfully by their seats, clearly unsure but determined to speak. "I want you both to know again how deeply sorry I am for what I did to you. I've learned so much from that day, and it's made me a better person. I can't change what happened, but I promise I've changed myself," Karen said. Karen's honest vulnerability was clear in her face, and Mia looked deeply into her eyes, sensing the sincerity in what she was saying. Elijah watched in silence, trusting his sister's response. After a moment, Mia gave Karen a soft nod and said, "Thank you for saying that. I believe you." Mia replied softly, her voice full of genuine kindness and maturity. Karen looked calm and moved by Mia's gentle acceptance. She nodded respectfully and quietly went about her work, deeply grateful for Mia's compassion. Their father gently put his arm around Mia and Elijah, clearly proud of their maturity, compassion, and grace. Mia quietly leaned into his comforting embrace, feeling deeply reassured. As the plane took off, rising smoothly into a clear blue sky, she looked out the window and thought about everything they'd been through. She now understood how even painful experiences could lead to deep growth, understanding, and real change. For Mia, that hard day was a powerful reminder of how important it is to speak out, stay compassionate, and choose hope even when things are hard. For Elijah, it taught him resilience and empathy, which changed his deep understanding of what is fair. And for Karen, it turned her into someone who was fully committed to kindness and understanding and determined to speak out. Always fighting for fairness and respect for everyone, their shared journey, which started out hurtful and embarrassing, had quietly become a meaningful force for real change not only within themselves but also within the airline and in their community. They would never forget the pain they'd felt, but they all knew that real strength and growth often came from those hard times that taught them clearly and deeply about the importance of respect, compassion, and dignity. As Mia leaned back in her seat and watched the clouds drift by, she felt truly hopeful and proud. She was proud of how she and Elijah had dealt with their painful experience, and she was also proud of how their father had stood by their side. She was even proud of Karen's sincere efforts to change. She realized that life wasn't just about avoiding pain or difficulty. It was also about responding thoughtfully, compassionately, and courageously when those times came up. The plane kept moving forward, carrying them toward new experiences. Mia was sure that no matter where their lives took them, she and Elijah would always be strong, kind, and dedicated to treating everyone with respect and dignity, carrying forward the powerful lessons they had learned on that unforgettable journey. If you like this story, please like the video and let us know what you think in the comments below. Also, don't forget to subscribe to this channel for more stories like this.